This is Tuesday, May 12th, and we are here with Roy Jones, who was fire chief in Brewster for many years. He'll tell us more about that. We're meeting in the historic room of the Brewster Ladies Library. And also present are Jim Mills, Joanne Moran, and Alice Stelzer. Okay, Roy. Today we're going to talk more about the actual fire department and its history than about just you, but you are so connected with the fire department. In fact, some of us think of you as the fire department. So tell me, first of all, you moved here as a child. How old were you and when did you move here?
Well, basically moved here full-time. I turned 8 here.
Okay. And
we lived in Brewster Park. But I'd already been involved in the fire service before that. As a young child, a young man in Hingham, I had a ride-on fire truck at age roughly 1.5, which I still have. And there's pictures of Jerry riding the fire truck. Jerry is me. And my first contact with a fire department was in Hingham, when our nursery school was taken to the Hingham Central Fire Station, and we were allowed to climb on then the American LaFrance city service ladder truck, which is now a totally antique because it was about a 1934 vehicle, and we're talking about 1947 and 48. So then when we were here in the summertime, I always heard the siren blow. So I always knew that there was something going on, and I would get Dad to try and take us if we could find out where the fire was, and that's a story in itself.
Well, tell me first, where was the siren?
The siren was on top of Town Hall.
Okay.
Sat plumb top on Town Hall. And was used up through roughly 1974, 75, when it finally froze up, and it was decided, because we were then using radios, that the siren was no longer needed. The siren was sounded every day at noontime, and that was the test, so that you knew that it was working. Now, the thing that led me further in the fire service, we lived for roughly 1.5 years in Shenango Bridge, New York, and I got interested. Dad took me down to the fire station. I knew their apparatus and could hear their whistle blow too. So let's go back to, I'm going to say roughly 1950, 51 would have been my first experience with Brewster, in that the Mushroom Cottage, which belonged to the Dibbles in Brewster Park, was fully involved one night. And I remember the noise of the apparatus and the people going up into the park. I can remember very clearly, the noise that night and the next day. And the Dibble boys, Tim and Bob and I were friends. We went up and we scrounged through the ashes and found hot embers and hot nails and things like that. That cottage sat on supports, on pilings, and that thing just burned completely up. The Mushroom Cottage probably was 25 or 30 years old when it burned. You'd have to go back and check the information on that.
So at that time, this is what, 50, 55, something like that?
Well, that was actually 1952 or 50.
Okay.
That was in 51 or 52, because we were summering, staying at my grandmother's at the entrance to the park.
Okay.
And so, again, interest in the fire service, keeping track of things, learning more about it. And then as I got older, I would get Dad to take me when the siren blew. We'd come up here, and hopefully if the Tidal Station was open, if Gabby was here, we could find out from her where the fire was.
Now, what are you talking about?
I am talking about the Tidal Station, which is located at the intersection of 137 and 6A.
And they
right?
sell awnings and lawn chairs now.
Yeah, they sell awnings,
Okay.
and awnings and lawn chairs now. They, of course, they sat right next to the fire station. The fire station was built on that property approximately 1940.
And
But
you're saying the fire station, that's the building immediately to the west of the...
that is correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And that was the fire station?
That was the fire station,
Was
yep.
it also the police station?
There was no police
There was
station.
no police station.
When Brewster went dial, so that's going to be 54, 55, they had to, they didn't have any operators to take emergency calls, so they had to establish a dispatch facility, and at that time, they put a little block on the back of the building. The fire chief had a desk, and there is a picture in one of the books of that whole thing with Max Sensabaugh standing there with people that I can't believe in the book they say they don't know who they are. I can identify every one of them.
Max Sensabaugh is the dispatcher.
Max Sensabaugh was one of the dispatchers.
Is this a volunteer job?
No, he was paid. He worked the night shifts, and he was allowed to sleep. They had a little cot that they could roll out, and he'd sleep in the corner, and the phone rang, he'd jump up, and there were 3 phones. There was a phone for 896-3232, which was the emergency number. There was a phone for 896, I do believe it was 7018, but I don't remember, that's the fire department number, and I don't remember what the police number was at that time.
Okay.
It's not the same as it is today. The daytime dispatcher, at least 5 days a week, was Virginia Hooper. Now, Virginia Hooper was married to one of the Hooper boys, Fred, who had been on the fire department since roughly 1940. And while I was fire chief, he was my deputy for at least 15 to 20 years. He was the assistant manager for Nixon State Park because his brother was the full manager. And Ginny had been an operator in the phone building, which is down across from the Wobbly Barn. And to give her a job, she just went over into doing the dispatch.
So were these 12-hour shifts?
I think they probably were. I don't know for sure. I can't give you the breakdown. Whether the records were ever kept, I don't know.
Right.
The fire department was organized approximately 1929, and I'm drawing a blank on the first fire chief's name. Then Leo Cummings became chief. Then Lloyd Ellis was chief, and then John Gage. Up until 1956, the fire department was organized under what's called a Board of Fire Engineers. And there were some civilian members to that Board of Fire Engineers, and technically they are supposed to take care of the management of the business side of the fire department, while the fire chief, technically under the law, was only responsible for running the fires and training. But I was there, and I'm pretty sure it was 56. They did away with the Board of Engineers, and John Gage became, and he'd been chief under the Board of Engineers because Lloyd Ellis had given it up. And he became chief under what's called Chapter 48, Section 42, which is called a Strong Chief's Law, which allows the chief to be the total manager and operational person for the fire department. And John was chief until 1973. He resigned. And then Paul Silver, who was his deputy, was then appointed fire chief.
And he's appointed by the selectmen?
Under the law, they were appointed by the selectmen, that's correct.
And they have to have some training, some education for this job.
They're supposed to. The growth of the Brewster Fire Department over the years was really a group of men who liked to get together. Some knew a lot and cared a lot. Others, Brewster was never considered in Barnstable County as a up-and-coming fire department. There are stories that just, one of the ones is the night that the grandfather's mustache burned. You know where that is?
No. Oh, yes, was that
The
Marina's?
turkey farm.
Oh, the turkey.
No, in Harwich. Going over Route 124, you go by where the houses are on the right and Seymour's Pond's on the right, some houses on the left, and then there's a street. I think it's Prince Road or something. Well, that road goes up and around. Sitting on the bluff there at one time was a farm. That became Storyland in the 1950s, a nightclub.
Yeah.
Then it became Your Father's Mustache, or Our Father's Mustache. And one winter night, in fact, I think it was New Year's Eve. It was fully involved. Brewster, being the closest town, was called. Well, Brewster didn't have a real organization to staff their apparatus or decide what apparatus was going to be staffed or anything. The guy sat down here at the station waiting for Dana Condit, Sr., not the prison Dana Condit, who rolled over and had gone back to bed. So when the Brewster people finally got there, Chatham and Dennis were already there. The building was being burned down, so the Brewster people were sent on to the Harwich Fire Station to cover the Harwich Fire Station on Bank Street. So there's one good story.
Tell me how. So there is one fire chief who is appointed, so he is official. Is this a full-time job?
No, this was in the days that we're talking about. He technically was given what we call a stipend to be fire chief, but John Gage worked for Pyrofax Gas out of Hyannis when everybody was primarily using LPG gas. He was only available when he was in town or somebody could get to him, because you got to remember in the 50s there weren't many portable radios, although the funny thing is Brewster had a portable radio but John left it in the station so that you could use it if you wanted to. So the only way you were going to reach him is if he was in town, heard the siren blow, or somebody could find him on the phone. He appointed, under the law, he appoints a deputy fire chief and all the members of the fire department. He would pick out Carl Clark, who was the superintendent of the highway department, and Carl and Tiny Theol were on the department as long as I can remember. So I'm talking mid-50s up into at least, early 60s. Those are two members. Paul Silver was a member of the fire department because Paul basically he's what we call a landscaper. He mowed lawns. That's what he did for a living. Gene Ryan was a member of the fire department. Oh, Henry Whittemore, definitely. Paul and Poyd Eldridge were all members of the fire department. Now, Poyd was the state forest fire patrolman for this area, so he was around a lot of the time, and he did have a radio, so he could find out when there was a fire. And you call them volunteers, but they were paid by the hour.
When they were actually fighting a fire?
When they went to a fire or a drill, they were paid for the time they spent. And I'll use that as a lead-in because the records keeping at that time was a notebook with the date and the times, maybe the name of the house or whatever, and then a list of the names of the people that were there, and then John would total it, he'd figure it out, total it up. At that point in time, I think probably Ginny Hooper finished out the paperwork, sent it over to the town, and that was your fire record and your payroll record. And that takes you back at least.
Tell me what apparatus there would have been at this early date, late 50s?
Well, let's go
60s?
back to the 40s,
Okay.
because thankfully, Fred and I got to sit around and talk a lot. The first motorized vehicle that they had, they built. It was some kind of delivery truck that they bought, and they put a front mount pump on it and put a water tank and some hose and stuff. That vehicle was in service up through the early 40s. The second vehicle was a Ford front mount pump. I believe it was a Maxim, which is a company up in Middleborough that built fire apparatus. Those were the first two pieces. The day of the fire at Sea Pines, which burned 3/4 of the building, those were the two pieces of fire apparatus. They took, if you look across from Sea Pines, there's a road that goes down behind the Catholic Church. Well, there used to be a decent pond down there. And they took the engine down, they laid a line down there, and the pump broke. So that was one of the big things. The house that my cousin lives in right now burned down in around 1912, when Brewster had no fire department.
Which house is this?
The corner of Center Street and Lower Road.
Oh, right, okay.
Well, they didn't, what they did was they were gonna pump from one engine at the pond, it's called a relay pump,
Right, okay.
up to the engine at the fire.
Right, okay.
Fred always says that he thought they had the fire just about under control when the pump let go, and they just that was the end of it.
I'm surprised there's anything of Sea Pines.
Well, you see, if you look at the pictures, the part that's there was separated just enough from the part that burned. So just fire separation was a big help there. I believe even Hyannis came down to help. That fire kind of ignited the town into doing something about the fire apparatus, and they went ahead and purchased a 1941 Buffalo. Buffalo was the make of a piece of fire apparatus, and there was a gentleman here on the Cape who sold Buffalo fire apparatus, and it was a very common piece of fire apparatus. Orleans had one, Bourne had 3 or 4, Brewster had one, I think there were a couple others, but anyway, all sold by this gentleman. And and Brewster bought it. It had what was called a 600 gallon a minute dreadnought pump on it. It was a rotary gear pump. Now, I know I'm getting technical, but theoretically, rotary gear pumps are easier to prime, meaning getting water out of a pond or something, than what's called a centrifugal pump. And so the idea being it had a large hose bed, it had very little water on it. In fact, I think it was only 175 gallons or maybe even 75. For its day, it was a pretty good piece of apparatus. It was, and if you look back, you can find out what they paid, and I'm going to say they paid $7,500 for it.
It was a huge amount of money.
Yeah, which was a huge amount of money. And now you can see why you've got a 3-bay station. Now, well, no, the old station, the one on 6A here, is 3 bays, 3 doors. When they bought the Buffalo, they needed to have, and they were building the station about that same time, they needed the 3 bays. Now, the interesting thing is the guys also kind of fixed up the basement area, this building next to Aggie's.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, we're not even there yet.
Right, okay. So where were these trucks parked?
Well, originally the first piece of fire apparatus was in the Wobbly Barn.
Okay.
Then there were some other places, and I think from what Fred said, I guess finally they built the station with 3 bays, and the 2 vehicles went in there, and then the Buffalo went in there. So that takes us roughly through 1941 or so. They finally got rid of the original vehicle they bought, or they built. And then in roughly 1949, the town went to Robinson Boiler Works and built and bought a truck that they built. It was roughly a 49 or 50 Ford, supposedly carried 800 gallons of water, had a 500-gallon-a-minute front mount pump, lousy piping, nobody engineered the piping, and would carry a lot of forestry hose, because you got to remember, the big thing in those days were forest fires.
Well, you know,
That's
I
what
was
the big
wondering
issues.
that, but at that time, the forests were just beginning to come back. It was still pretty open, wasn't it?
No, there was still a lot of land, and you'd get brush.
Okay,
You still had the railroad running,
yeah.
so you had the fires from the railroad. You had open burning going on all the time, and that was a vehicle that now carried some water, because the other two vehicles didn't have a lot of water on them. And so they had the second Ford that they had bought, they had the Buffalo, and they had what I call, let's see, that was engine 235. The next big fire that I can give you a little on was the Gold Coast. Now you know where the Gold Coast was. Well, it's now called the Crosby Mansion. And it was the Crosby Mansion. In the early 50s, an organization took it over and was running a very successful restaurant called the Gold Coast there. And one night, and it's interesting because the fire didn't start in the kitchen, it started in the dining area. And luckily, if you go down today and you look at that building, you've got I'll call it the brick part, and then you've got a concrete slab going south. That concrete slab was the dining area. They got down there, and they had help from Orleans and Dennis, and they saved the building. Now that's not going to be the last fire in that building, I'll tell you. But they lost the dining room. The Gold Coast then went kaput, and now we have Seascape. So we got and there was a break there, because I was at least 16 when Seascape opened, because I was driving, and the Gold Coast was like 51, maybe 52, so I still had a little way to go. Well, we still had a couple more fires down there, and I wasn't driving yet. I remember the whistle blowing. I got so ticked at my dad. The whistle blew, and the signals were, 1 was a test, 2 was the center part of town, 3 was East Brewster, 4 was West Brewster, and 5 was South Brewster. And in Brewster Park on Thursday nights we had dances. And I'd just gotten back from the dance, and the siren started to blow. I said, "Dad, let's go." "Nah, I don't feel like going." Well, I wish I had, because it was the second time the dining hall at Monomoy had burned. It burned once before, and I can't tell you when. I can't give you the exact time that they had the first fire, but the Monomoy dining hall burned twice in the history of the Camp Monomoy. But I can remember the second fire, or the night of the second fire, and I didn't get to go. So, going back in let's see, Brewster had the newest engine. In 1957, Brewster voted $15,000 to purchase a Ford 750 pump, 500-gallon tank, and pretty up-to-date vehicle. A little on the inexpensive side, but it was at least an up-to-date vehicle. That replaced the old Ford, the second old Ford. What John did, because the weight on the floor was beginning to get to be a little tough, and they They started, if you go in there now underneath, they're all lolly columns. Now, I don't know whether you pulled them out or not, but when we moved, that place was lolly column world because, and you could watch, you back the engine in or pull it out, you could watch the floor go back and forth because it was not designed for vehicles carrying 500 or 800 gallons of water.
Plus the vehicles are getting larger.
Well, yeah, the vehicles were larger too, so they weighed more. But you had 235 in the far look facing the station. Far left was 235, center was 233, far right was 237. John numbered all the engines, and Barnstable County was very, very advanced in that they originally in the 50s set up, as radios were coming in, they set up a radio call system assigning numbers to each town in the system. There was one radio channel for all of Barnstable County, and so that you could tell who was who, you had a series of numbers assigned. For instance, Brewster, and John was really good about it, he had 230 through 249 assigned to the town. Now, that's back when he only had 3 vehicles.
And the population was?
And the population at that time was probably 1,800, 2,500.
Or less.
Or less, yeah, you'd have to go back and look. And so he was ahead on some of the stuff. The county, by doing that, has been way ahead of a lot of places in avoiding confusion, because the numbering system still exists. So, but anyway, so that's why I say 235, 233, 237, and using the numbers. The next fiasco fire that I can think of, I was in college, and I was working in College Park as a career firefighter. So I missed the call, darn it. Was Nevins's house and hardware store. I say Nevins's. Should have said Mears's, but no, it was Nevins's by that time. And the fire started in the furnace room. And at that time, the Brewster firefighters were not what we call aggressive firefighters, although they did have 2 pieces of breathing apparatus so that you could put something on to go into a smoky atmosphere. But very few members of the department ever wanted to do it. Of course, Brewster started to run out of water, and somebody brought the expert for driving the Buffalo and using the Buffalo was Stanley Ryder. Now, Stanley Ryder worked for Gabby in the Tidal Station, so 90% of the time he was driving during the day, he was driving the first engine out. But he also was one of the few that really understood how to use the Buffalo. He, at that time, was no longer on the department. Before I joined the department in '64, there were very few people that wanted to operate that vehicle, that Buffalo, because the type of pump on it and the way you operated it, a lot of them just did not want to touch it. Well, somebody drove it down to the fire. And somebody said, oh good, we can get water. We'll go to the creek, we'll draft out of the creek. Well, they got it down there and nobody knew how to draft. Luckily, Lloyd Ellis came along and he knew how to operate the Buffalo, and he finally got water. But there is a picture in the Cape Cod Times of all this apparatus sort of lined up as if they were parking in front of the Nevins house that was burning away.
I know where Nevin's store was. It was approximately where Luke's is now. But yeah. Where was their house?
Right next to it. Actually, their house was closer to where Luke's store is now, and just a hair over. The 2 were connected. I'm not sure how much of the house burned, but the store burned and a portion of the house, because it was all torn. Yeah, it was all torn down because they built Nevins's store and they built Brewster Hardware.
Right.
Brewster Hardware was where basically the house was.
So these trucks could take water from salt water as well as fresh water?
Oh yeah, it won't bite.
Okay.
The thing is, when you use salt, when you draft salt water or you're pumping salt water, you want to take and then flush the pump
Yeah.
with the fresh water to get it out. Although years ago, everybody was using brass fittings and everything, so it really, the salt water wouldn't affect it as badly. You still had to flush and everything. And sadly enough, for a while, Brewster had the reputation of being cellar savers. It's because the fire service at that time was growing and changing. And it was changing very drastically as far as training goes and as far as capability of even call personnel as to what they would be expected to know and understand. John was doing the best he could, but he was still somewhat of the 1950s era, not looking into the 60s. And I'll admit, I was the agitator. Because my real fire service career started in College Park, Maryland in 1963, living in the fire station and seeing fire about once a week. And driving in a city atmosphere, being in a city where I was going to school was also the state of Maryland fire training system. So I'm getting that and I'm trying to bring it back to Brewster. I said, John, we're the double male, double female, inch and a half. And he says, we don't have those. I said, what, we don't? And because they were a standard piece of equipment that we used in the city. I officially joined the fire department with John's blessing in June of 1964. And before that, I had been at quite a few fires. I'd go help pull hose and stuff like that. Once I officially became a member, I was driving apparatus and trying to help people learn things.
You were younger than John, but were you younger than most of the call firefighters?
Yes, I was. At that point in time, I was probably the youngest.
Yeah.
And at that time, they didn't like to take you until you were 21, but I was, by that time, by 64, I was 19, and I was already a firefighter. I'd already had basic firefighter training, which was sadly enough, more than most of the guys had ever had. The department went through a change in the 60s, the department went through a change in the number of people, and the attitude of the people, and the interest of the people, in realizing that it was more of a responsibility and a job.
When did you become chief?
I became chief in 1981, I'm sorry.
So who was between John and you?
Okay, when John resigned, they appointed Paul Silva as chief.
Right.
Now, Paul Silva held it for approximately 2 years and then passed it on to his nephew. And I'll be very candid and online. They didn't want to appoint me because I was ahead of them all. And I was at that time, and you can go back, I was doing drills, documenting everything, writing everything down, trying to get them to fill out reports. We were starting to have a group of young people coming on the department that wanted to do this, and we had a group that didn't want any part of it. Gordy, without any training, nice guy, he was an electrician in town, at that time married to a wonderful lady, and so he took over chief. But he basically acted as chief, and he was good enough to let me carry the ball going forward. And that's a real good thing to be able to say, is that I basically was the training officer. When he became chief, I was still technically just a rescue captain, and he immediately made me a fire and rescue captain. And his deputy was Fred Hooper, and Fred had been deputy under Paul Silver, and that was a good scenario. So he let me try and move things on. We did our drills, we did classes. We were really trying to bring the department forward. We were the first department to have pagers. And because I had learned about them, we finally got the association to spend the money on them. There was one radio man who, because they were made by Motorola, and he had General Electric. He said, "Oh, those things will never work." Well, what does everybody carry now? They carry a telephone or a pager. Pagers are now gone. Brewster was one of the last departments on the Cape to have what we call installers for their house, a radio that goes off when a certain tone is put out over the radio, and the radio goes off and you can hear all the messages and everything. Right. Johnny Paulson and I were carrying portable receivers before the town had installers. Brewster never really had an interest in rescue. They did have a resuscitator, which was a big suitcase weighing about 35 to 40 pounds that you put on a guy's face and supposedly was going to make him breathe. For years that was done by the fire department, and what the dispatcher would do is they'd look around for somebody they knew that knew how to operate it, go to the station and get it, and then go to the house and put it on him until the ambulance from Orleans got there. As far as first aid, theoretically the police were supposed to do it, and for a while they had just sedans, so there was nothing. Then they bought station wagons and put a stretcher in the back of the station wagon, so theoretically they could carry somebody, because 99% of the transports for somebody hurt or sick in the town of Brewster was done by the Orleans Brewster Eastham Ambulance, which was an association. For that world at that time was probably an effective thing. But as emergency medicine came along and people began to look at things and go, well, why aren't we getting care right away? The questions came up. Here in Brewster, the issue came to a forefront with an accident up in Sweetwater Forest where a gentleman by the name of Eddie Canham, who was an electrical contractor, was on a tractor and it rolled over on him. And Dave and Ann Klein went out to help him, and it took an hour for any help to come, or a long time anyway. So they started making an issue, but just before that, two guys by the name of Roy and John, for the summers of 1967 and 68, offered emergency care to the people of the town of Brewster. We did it. John Gage, the fire chief, really didn't want us to do it, but we worked it with Sabin Lord, the police chief at that time, and he was glad to have us, so that if a medical emergency or an accident occurred or something like that, the dispatcher would try and find Roy or John or both of us to go to the call. So for 2 summers, there was basically a 2-man emergency crew to help the police or help deal with it.
Did these men have some training?
Yes, they did, because both of them, one of them was a captain in the Eastham Fire and Rescue Department, and it had full Red Cross training at that time. The other gentleman worked for the Orleans Fire Department in the summertime, and he had first aid training. It's John Paulson and Roy Jones. The Eddie Canham scenario happened in the fall of 1968. So I'd gone back to, John and I had both gone back to our schools. And of course my other training was, I'm riding an engine in an ambulance in a city in a heavy rescue. So I'm seeing all sorts of stuff for 4 years before I'm doing this. I graduated basically in January. I got a phone call, and it was Ann Klein. She asked me, she said, Roy, can you help organize a rescue squad? And I laid out what would need to be done. They said, well, we got to get this going. She said, who can we get to teach classes? And I said, well, before you do anything, we've got to have people up and trained in at least Red Cross first aid, because paramedics and EMTs did not exist at that time. And I said, the first thing we got to do, we've got to have somebody say they will sponsor us. And I said, it should be the fire department, because all around us, the fire departments are the ones sponsoring the rescue squads. So a meeting was arranged with the selectmen. Larry Doyle was one of the selectmen, John Gage, and Charlie Frazier, who was the town council at that time. And basically I outlined the plan as to what we would do and how we would go forward. And they looked at John and they said, John, will you do it? Will you take the rescue squad? From there, we were part of the fire department. The only two members originally on the rescue squad who were also firemen were Henry Sears and myself. Oh. Now what happened is we went out and got Ernie Hollis, who was my captain, rescue captain in Eastham, Bob Tucker, father of young Bob Tucker, who just retired in Dennis, and Eddie Nichols, who was the captain of the rescue squad in Orleans. We set up 2 classes so we could pick up as many people as we could. The clients were big movers. Eddie Canham became a member. Arlene Keegan was in the class. So all of a sudden we're doing women. Now remember, this is 1969. Women are not allowed to do this stuff. Again, Brewster was a leader in taking and using women in really responsible positions. In the meantime, because I was back getting ready to go into the Air Force, I was working for the Orleans Eastham Brewster Ambulance Association, so I was riding the ambulance. I was also the single person rescue squad in Brewster because nobody else had been finished training. And the reports exist for that period of time. One of the sad ones, although I think he lived, was a young man that got hit by a car down on Paynes Creek Road, and we waited 40 minutes for the ambulance. There was nothing I could do. I had no way to transport. All I could do was make him comfortable. I'm going to say it was May 1st that the rescue squad went in service. They had finished their training. We developed a system for them to be notified, but there was no vehicle at that time to use. Arthur Baranowski went to Hyannis and picked up an old Boston ambulance, International Travel All Ambulance, and donated it to the town of Brewster. And there are pictures of that. One of his people, Guy Areola, had taken the class and was a member of the rescue squad. So he donated the vehicle. The hazard property, which is where the present fire station is, had been acquired by the town. That was an old house and a barn. And part of the barn was taken over by the DPW, and the other part of the barn became the rescue building. The International would just fit in. You'd had to back it up against the back wall, and then you could close the doors. There was no heat or anything. But the rescue squad people got together, cleaned all the things up, got it set up, so Brewster had a vehicle and a trained group of people to do rescue. Technically, I was the first rescue captain, and then when I went into service, Henry Sears took over as basically the second rescue captain and turned it back over to me when I came back.
You've mentioned that the men who were fire chief before you had other jobs.
Yes.
When did the chief become a full-time position?
The chief's job became a full-time position roughly 1990, 96.
And when did you start having regular paid firefighters instead of on-call paid by the hour?
In 1974, 75.
So by 74, 75, you had people who were at least paid regularly?
We started with one. We did the horrible thing of hiring a woman who was trained as a paramedic. And she was the first firefighter, female firefighter, paramedic in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Margot Fitch. We've got, by that time, Artie Romay was a career person, and Margot was a career person. So I basically inherited them. They were good people. They had everything under control. I said, look, I'll be in here 3 or 4 hours every day. I'll take care of the paperwork. I have a radio. I'll be at the call if I'm needed. What more do you want for a fire chief at that point in time? Margot did all the paperwork. When Charlie came on, we worked it out that we went from just a short number of hours to basically 20 hours, and then with a full intention of taking it 25, 30, and then full 40 as the town needed it to happen. It's interesting because in the 70s we saw a lot of fire. Rescues were going up, but I would say it was the 80s and 90s where EMS, emergency medical, became more and more of the issue. In the 70s, we were seeing at least one fire a month. And I mean not a brush fire, but maybe a house fire, a good chimney fire, and something where the guys really had to work. Lay a line and pull hose and everything else. Had to be while I was still in school when I was home. We had a fire on Robbins Hill Road, off of Robbins Hill Road, and the engine, the only breathing apparatus was on engine 233, which is the primary engine to go to a building fire. Well, when that engine went around the corner at Robbins Hill and Lower Road, the cabinet opened up and the cases with the masks fell out. And then that engine somehow got bypassed by engine 235, got up the dirt road. I was right behind Henry Witt. We went in, crawled in, there was a bed burning. We didn't have any breathing apparatus, so we're right down next to the floor trying to see what was going on. I said, well, we're going to get this cleared out. I opened the window, and the storm window was there, and I tried to open, I said, the hell with this. I took the chair and popped the window, and you would have thought the world had collapsed. But here we are, inside, trying to put the fire out, and we did. And then all we did was ventilate the building, and we did a proper fire department procedure. And another story, and this was later on, we had a fire, it was Boxwood, which is at the corner of Crosby Lane and 6A, and that was a Bad Boys building. And we had a fire in one of the upstairs bedrooms. And I drove the Buffalo, figuring I was going to lay a line. When I pulled up, Johnny came out to me and said, Jerry, get in there. Nobody's got a mask, and Dixie in there all alone. Because this was when the department, nobody wanted to use masks. I was very comfortable with breathing apparatus, having used it as part of my job in College Park. So he had already grabbed the extra mask. Dickie had one on. I grabbed one. I went up the stairs. The fire was in the bedroom on the second floor. Again, Dick's trying to put it out. We can't see where we're going or anything. I said, okay, we'll take care of this. I put a chair through the window and then ventilated, which is with a hose line. And by doing that, you take and you put the hose line on a fog pattern right just short of the size of the window, and it takes the air out with it. Well, that was back in the days when a lot of Brewster firefighters didn't like to wear gear. They're all standing around down underneath and getting rained on. And that Paul Silver was chief then, because wait a minute, if you had gear on, you wouldn't have bothered you. I said, we had to ventilate. And Fred Hooper was on the stairway where there was no smoke, and he was going, yeah. The rescue squad got off to a great start. The people were good. Everybody was dedicated. Travel All Ambulance needed a little help. So in 1972, and I was back here TDY from the Air Force going to school, we asked the town for $15,000 to purchase a new ambulance. And that vehicle was purchased. The chassis for that vehicle is up at Donnie's, Donnie Watkins. The box still used to be sitting over the DPW. You look at the ambulances you see today, they're a box on a chassis, or,
Yeah.
no more Cadillacs. Brewster had the first box in Barnstable County. We had to take 235, put it over at the water department, and we had to put the new 1972 Ford ambulance 242, in the fire station. And with that, a gentleman by the name of Malcolm Rancourt said, let's have a junior program. And let's have a junior program for EMS, for emergency medical. He was teaching them first aid. He taught them how to work in the ambulances. We even developed a system when they were finished, if the ambulance was going by their house, we could pick them up. And this is 1972, 73. Those people, those young people, there were a few that went other ways, and eventually Malcolm worked for the phone company. I don't know what, he dropped out of the rescue squad, and today there are two people from that original group still on the rescue squad. Diane Romay, who was Diane Baranowski, and Cindy Coulter, which was Cynthia Gallant. There are pictures of them as in part of the group working with Malcolm at that time. There was a third person who was in that group, who was Katie Hansen, who became Katie McGuire and then Katie Hansen again. Katie Hansen retired as a career captain from the Chatham Fire Department. Brewster has had a lead in a lot of things in the fire service over the last 30, 40 years.
How many full-time firefighters do we have in town now?
We have 15.
Does that include the rescue people?
All the career people are either firefighter paramedics or firefighter EMTs.
Oh.
Because the way emergency medicine has gone, you're trying to do a double job with the career people. Where I have a problem with what's being done now, if you're trying to maintain a combination or call department, you're better off saying, okay, if you want to do just EMS, come on as a call person, do EMS, because that requires a lot of time and a lot of energy. If you want to come on the department and do just fire, come on and do just fire. But in the call system, you're only calling the person for what you want them to do. If you're a career firefighter, you have a regular work schedule.
Okay.
When you go to work. The first thing is checking apparatus and equipment.
So the pump doesn't fail.
That's exactly right. So basically, you've got to, depending on who's running the organization, you've got certain days that certain vehicles and certain pieces of equipment are being checked. Yeah. And there's a checklist for everything, so everything is documented. One day you may be checking engine 239, and the next day you're checking engine 234. So it keeps you familiar with the equipment.
Right.
You've got your own protective clothing that you've got to make sure is ready to go. You have training that should be done, and that can be done in several different ways to go over things. There are house chores that need to be done to keep the station up to date. Normally night shift is considered a little less, but usually there are certain checklists or things that need to be done that are done at night because that's the easiest time to do them. The firecrackers were formed roughly when we went into the new station. There was a time when every department seemed to have a female auxiliary. And the interesting thing is Brewster's was formed at the time that women were becoming part of the actual operation, and yet there were women who knew they were never going to be part of the actual operation. Orleans had a auxiliary for years. Dennis and Harwich had auxiliaries. the ladies here decided we're going to be the firecrackers, and the idea was to go out and try and raise money to buy additional equipment for the department, to help, anything to do to help the department. The thing that the ladies here had, I don't know what, they'd go out and get donations, and you'd go around, you'd buy tickets, and you'd throw them in a cup, and then you go through, and then somebody pull all the tickets, and if your ticket was pulled, you won. The Firefighters Association, which is a separate organization, was established. I'm going to go back into the 50s, well, I would say in the 40s. That, for the longest time, was a one night a month. It usually was a Monday night. A group of 2 or 3 guys, usually 3, had to cook supper for everybody else, and we were in the old town hall, and that's when there was a full kitchen there. You cook supper, and that was, and then had a meeting, and that was it for the fire association.
So it gave you a little more camaraderie. You got to know
It gave
each
you a little
other.
more camaraderie. We had some real heroes. We've had some real heroes. Artie Romay, thank God he was okay, went down in a well up on Sprawling Hills, where a father and son had died from asphyxia. So I came from Orleans, but they had already determined they were dead by the time I got to Brewster. So I was captain of the rescue squad then, and but Artie did all the right things, and thank God. So Margot was a blessing, total blessing in the way she was able to handle things as a paramedic. Artie went out and got his paramedic. So we had 2 paramedics until we started to have to hire. I had to hire a 3rd person, Mike McGuire. Over the years, there have been many, many incidents that I've either been the operations chief on or the chief of department. And one really sticks in mind, and I wanted to talk about it because I think it's absolutely amazing. We got a call for 2 lost children up in Pine Bluff Road area. We started to search. Diane Romay came across a break in the ice. We asked Orleans for some help with lighting plant. We had bought ourselves one of the first ice sleds ever made. And so we were able to slide that out on the ice, and we weren't more than, I'm going to say, 8 feet out, and there were the 2 kids. There was nothing you could do at that point in time. And afterwards, people thought, well, if they're dead and cold, maybe you can make them warmer and they'll live. Unfortunately, at that point in time, oh man, this makes me think of things. All right, there's an incident. You deal with it. It's over. Last year I was chief. Had a woman and a man come in. The man introduced himself, and he said, I used to have a brother and a sister, and I lived up in Pine Bluff. I've forgotten the road. Do you remember the incident? Since I was the operations chief, I did. And I went and I had Darlene pull the report, went over what happened with him. And I'll tell you, and you can hear it in my voice now, talking to a man who lost his brother and sister and now wanted to hear about it is one of the toughest things to do. Because it wasn't like I wasn't there, I didn't see anything, I didn't do anything. I was there, I was dealing with the recovery. I've had, I don't know how many other drownings, but that one, probably because he and his wife came back to find out what happened.
Because he was a little kid too.
Because he was a little kid. In fact, I think he was the youngest. He was like 3. Well, the fire department has built over the years a good inventory of specialized equipment. We were the first department on Cape Cod to have low pressure airbags. and which you can use to lift things. We were asked to go to Chatham to lift an aircraft out of the water or up high enough so they could put stuff underneath it. Chatham got one of their engines stuck in a dry well over at May Institute in Chatham one day, and they couldn't figure out how to lift it up. So we went over with the low pressure airbags. We also had high pressure airbags. We were very fortunate, and we've been fortunate in that the equipment the department's been able to acquire is a lot of specialized equipment.
You have a boat?
Brewster got a boat in 64, because they got a call for a man and a girl drowned in Great Pond, Eastham. Eastham did not have a boat. They got together, Harwich had a duck, Orleans had a duck and a boat, Wellfleet had a boat, Harwich had a whaler. Anyway, they put together enough boats to go down, and at that time, diving was not a common thing, so you dragged. And when a hook caught the person, you brought them up. Well, I was in the boat with another Harwich guy, and we hooked the girl and brought her up. That got, like, Eastham bought a boat, because when I went to work down there, they had a whaler. Brewster bought a whaler. Everybody seemed to say, okay. Brewster had gotten a whaler. We were practicing with it. We had it out on Long Pond. In fact, Henry and I were in the boat. We were scooting around. Well, we didn't have a portable radio with us. All of a sudden, we see him waving on the shore at the landing. So we go in, come on, we got a drowning in Sheep's Pond. So, loaded up the boat, put the boat in the water at Sheep's. There wasn't a nice landing there then. Sheldon Ufile and myself and Dickie Watson were in the boat. It was a college kid. He had tried to swim. He'd swum over to the point. Well, swimming back, he went down. He went down in the area where the old car was. Dickie and I could see him. We were getting the grappling hooks ready. Sheldon Ufile, who was a painter, a quiet guy, somebody you never would have expected to do anything, strips down, dives in, and starts to bring him up. First time, he dropped him. So we gave him the anchor rope. He went down again, tied the anchor rope on, and we brought him up. But the bravery of that man, unbelievable. So, yes, I took over as chief. I loved it. Had great people. I think we did a lot of good things. We had some great fires. We had some sad fires. We had under my job, we had 2 fatal fires. We had one on Tower Hill Circle, and we had one up on Allen Drive. The one on Allen Drive, I got to be so proud of the people, because I was at the National Fire Academy when that fire occurred. They rescued her. Captain Romay and Captain Battles rescued the woman out of the 2nd floor, and the ambulance with Captain Sears, or some of the former juniors, were there. They transported, and unfortunately the woman didn't make it. But we put together with the legislature and some money from the state, money from the association, money from the town, a vehicle that we thought would be valuable in the town. It's not exactly a full brush breaker, which is a vehicle designed to go down through the woods, pushing trees over and everything. We had 2 because we acquired ones that other towns didn't want that belonged to the county. But we always felt that we needed a vehicle that carried a decent amount of water, and it could go down a dirt road or a bike path or a path, and have the hose and the water and the tools to do a lot of work.
You really built up the department.
I candidly built the department.
Yeah.
That is right. And I'm proud of it, and I had great people to work with. I had arguments with some people, but we put Brewster on the map for the fire department. People around us were hiring our call people because they knew they were already trained.
Now,
They
as a
knew
tribute.
that these people were already gonna. You go around and you look and you find the captains and the firefighters around us that used to be Brewster people. There are a lot of them, and I'm proud of that. And they're good. They're good people. I'm a leader. I always have been, and I always will be. And fire service is my life, and I just keep going.
You should be on call, Roy.
Yes, well, I am,
All right.
because I am a state fire and EMS mobilization regional coordinator. So technically, I am on call for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts at this moment. We haven't gotten to the two fires at the Gold Coast or at the Crosby Mansion. That probably, and I hate to say it was the first 5-alarm fire on the Lower Cape. It was the first time on the Lower Cape that 3 aerial ladders had been operating all at the same time. We broke our aerial ladder. And you can, thanks to quick work by the second in crew, the mansion was saved. We may have lost the beach house, but that was a Christmas Eve to definitely remember.
But there was an arsonist who hit several
Well,
buildings in town.
Yes. The arsonist hit the building up on 6A near it was the carriage house. It was the carriage house. We believe he did a couple brush fires. We can't pin any of them down, but we can pin both fires at the same time at the Crosby Mansion. One in the mansion, one in the beach house. Graham Bates lived in the big house across from Gabby's, where the campground is today. And Gene Sears is a Bates. Bobby Bates, Bob had to be, I think he was a senior, so I was a junior. Bob loved fire too. And so he'd go anywhere that his dad went, but he had to follow the engine. I would have had to follow the engine because I was 17. So the siren goes off. I beat it down. I caught Graham. He was headed up with the engine, and Bobby, so I could follow him. We go up to Slough Road and hang a left on what is now called Red Top Road. That's the other end of Red Top Road. Okay, second house in, well involved in fire. Bobby and I grabbed the 1.5 inches and started advancing it and helping knock the fire down. They brought 235 in, they used that water. They brought the Buffalo in and then backed out, laying a line to go down, because the landing you used to be able to draft from. That fire taken care of. All right, now let's go forward to, I'm chief, let's call it 88, 89. Saturday morning, a house explodes on Red Top Road. We get up there, house fully involved, parts all over the place. There's pieces. This is in the wintertime. There are pieces out on the ice. This is the rebuilt house of the house that Bobby and I were at before. Now, by that time, Bobby is a member of the Dennis Call Department. So I struck a second. So I think he made that fire too. But his two guys who were at the first fire, 20 some odd or 25 years earlier, were at the second fire. This guy had gone in, claimed he was washing the walls with gasoline. He was at the door and something ignited, It blew him out, and he took off. He was found off Cape. That's the best I can say right now. I'm going to say Weymouth or getting medical care, because he was burned. Because his hat was in the woods opposite the door. We found that. I've got the original newspaper article on the original fire, and I've got pictures that we took of the fire later on, 25 years later or 20 years later. I should have looked it up. If I'm going to brag about anything, I think I took the department from being cellar savers to at least partial savers.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all very much.